This still feels unreal to me. One day, I saved someone's life, a man who had stopped breathing right in front of me, and less than 24 hours later, I was fired. Yeah, you heard that right, fired. And if you think that's the craziest part, wait until you hear about the helicopters. I want to share this story because it's been on my mind for a while. It's about a moment where I had to make a choice, follow company policy or do what I knew was right. I chose the latter, and I don't regret it for a second, even though it cost me my job. Here's what happened. It was supposed to be an ordinary shift, the kind you get through by counting down the hours. I worked as a security guard back then, and honestly, most days were dull, patrolling the same hallways, checking the same cameras, and dealing with the occasional minor incident. But this day was different. It started with a weird feeling in my gut, one of those moments when something feels off. I noticed a man standing near the wall by the lobby entrance. At first, I didn't think much of it. People lean on walls all the time, right? But then I noticed his face. He was pale, paler than I've ever seen, and there was a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead. He looked like he was struggling to breathe. I approached him and asked, "Hey, sir, are you okay?" He tried to answer, but his words came out in this faint, raspy whisper. And then, just like that, he collapsed, crumbling to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. I froze for half a second, my mind racing. What do I do? Should I call for help first or try to help him myself? I knelt beside him, my hands trembling. "Sir? Can you hear me?" No response. He wasn't breathing. His chest wasn't moving, and his face was turning an awful shade of blue. In that moment, my training kicked in. I fumbled for my radio and called it in medical emergency in the lobby. "Get 911 here now." Then I leaned over him and started CPR. My hands pressed against his chest, and I pushed hard and fast, counting in my head, 1, 2, 3. It felt like forever. I kept glancing at his face, willing him to breathe. Around me, a small crowd started to gather. Someone murmured, "Is he gonna make it?" I blocked it out. All I could focus on was keeping him alive until help arrived. When the paramedics finally showed up, they told me I'd done it. I'd saved his life. I felt this overwhelming mix of relief and pride. But even as they wheeled him away, a nagging thought crept in. Did I break the rules? Would the company see this as a problem? Turns out they would. And the fallout was worse than I ever could have imagined. The aftermath of saving that man's life hit me like a freight train. At first, I was riding a high. There's no other way to describe it. Knowing that my actions had literally pulled someone back from the brink of death? It felt incredible. People were clapping me on the back, saying things like, "You're a hero," and not everyone would have stepped up like that. Even the paramedics told me, if you hadn't acted when you did, he wouldn't have made it. But then, the whispers started. It was subtle at first. A supervisor gave me a look, not the proud, approving kind, but the kind that makes your stomach churn. The next morning, I got a call to come into the office. My boss, let's call him Mr. Bradford, was sitting behind his desk, his usual gruff expression replaced by something unreadable. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked, his tone colder than I'd expected. For a second, I thought maybe he was about to congratulate me, offer a bonus, or at least some kind of recognition. Because of what happened yesterday," I ventured. Bradford nodded slowly and leaned forward. "You broke protocol." My heart sank. What? I saved a man's life. What else was I supposed to do? He sighed like I was a child who just didn't get it. "You're not trained for medical intervention. Your job is to observe and report, not to take matters into your own hands. If something had gone wrong, if he died, you'd have put the company at risk for a lawsuit. A lawsuit? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, what, was I just supposed to stand there and watch him die? My voice was rising, but I didn't care. Don't get emotional, he said, like he wasn't accusing me of doing something wrong for saving a life. We're not saying you didn't mean well, but this company has rules. And you broke them. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. It wasn't just disappointment, it was betrayal. How could they see this as anything other than doing the right thing? But Bradford wasn't done. We've reviewed the incident, and unfortunately, we have no choice but to let you go. Effective immediately. I sat there, stunned. Fired? For this? I wanted to argue, to yell, to make him see reason. But the way he was looking at me, with that mix of indifference and discomfort, I knew it was pointless. They'd made up their minds. As I walked out of that office, every step felt heavier than the last. My coworkers avoided my eyes, the same ones who'd praised me less than 24 hours earlier. It was like I'd gone from hero to pariah in record time. But here's the thing, even as anger and disbelief churned inside me, a part of me couldn't shake the question. Did I do the right thing? Was following my instincts worth losing my job? Looking back now, I know the answer. But in that moment, standing there with my termination papers in hand, all I could think was, how did it come to this? I thought the worst was over when I walked out of that office, clutching the termination letter in my shaking hands. But I was wrong, so wrong. The next day, just as I was starting to process everything, the air outside my apartment filled with a low, droning sound. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was a lawnmower or some construction crew nearby. But it grew louder and closer. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened my curtains, and that's when I saw it. A helicopter! Not just any helicopter, but one of those sleek corporate ones you see in movies, the kind that screams, "We have more money than you'll ever see in your lifetime." It circled overhead for a moment, then descended onto the open lot across the street. What the hell? I whispered, watching as the blades kicked up dust and debris, sending leaves scattering like confetti. I wasn't the only one curious. Neighbors started gathering on their porches, pointing and murmuring. It was like something out of an action movie. Then, the door to the helicopter swung open, and out stepped 3 people in sharp suits. Their postures were stiff, their faces unreadable. I couldn't help but feel my stomach twist. Was this about me? It had to be, but why? A knock at my door snapped me out of my daze. I opened it to find a man in a crisp black suit, sunglasses perched on his nose even though we were indoors. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made it clear I didn't have a choice. "About what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Yesterday," he replied. "Your actions." I followed him outside, where the other suited figures were waiting. The moment they saw me, their expressions turned icy. One of them, a tall woman with a severe bun, stepped forward. "You're the one who intervened?" she asked, her tone laced with disapproval. "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my throat. She exchanged a glance with the others, then said, "Do you have any idea what kind of liability you've caused? What this could mean for the company?" Liability? Again with that word. My frustration boiled over. A man was dying. I shouted. What was I supposed to do? Just watch him choke and hope someone else stepped in? The woman's lips tightened into a thin line. "We're not here to debate ethics," she snapped. "We're here to clean up the mess you've made." "Mess?" I repeated, incredulous. I saved a life, and you're calling it a mess? Before she could respond, a fourth figure emerged from the helicopter, a man I recognized immediately. He was the CEO of the company, someone I'd only ever seen in newsletters and corporate videos. He walked straight up to me, his expression unreadable. "I've reviewed the situation," he said slowly. "And while your intentions were good, you've put us in a very difficult position." My heart sank. I could already tell where this was going. "You will not be reinstated," he continued. "But we do need you to sign an NDA. In exchange, we're prepared to offer you compensation." Compensation? An NDA? The sheer absurdity of it made me laugh, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed in the tense silence. "So that's it?" I said. "You'd rather sweep this under the rug than admit that your policies are broken?" The CEO didn't flinch. "This is not a negotiation." I stared at him, my blood boiling. This wasn't about right or wrong to them. It was about control, about saving face. And as I stood there, surrounded by suits and a helicopter waiting to whisk them away, I realized something. I might have lost my job, but I hadn't lost my voice. "No deal," I said firmly, stepping back. "I'm not signing anything." The CEO's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. They climbed back into the helicopter, the blades roaring to life. As it lifted off, I watched it fade into the sky, a symbol of everything wrong with a world that prioritizes policies over people. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let this end here. As I watched the helicopter disappear into the sky, I couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of it all. How did saving a life become a punishable act? How did policies outweigh basic humanity? I lost my job, but I'd do it all again, because doing the right thing matters more than corporate rules. The question lingers in my mind. How many others have faced this same choice, silenced by fear of retaliation? Maybe it's time we stop accepting systems that punish courage. What would you have done in my shoes? Let me know, because this conversation isn't over yet.